Hi, good morning, everybody. So happy that you could join us today, early on a Monday. Hopefully, everyone had a great weekend. This is our first opportunity to talk about this course. We've had many of chats with folks in the industry, especially on the red team side, and we know that there's a lot of energy around SANS producing its first 6-day red team course. We've been in development for quite a bit. We're at the tail end of that. We're really stress testing the range environment. There's a couple firsts for that we'll talk about during this presentation. We got a few slides to talk about each day of the course, sort of what we were going after, a demo, as well as plenty of time for questions and answers. And so if you've got any questions, you should have a chat feature to be able to send those into Zoom. Otherwise, I'll continue on, do a brief little intro for myself, as long as I gain control.
You're not getting control?
I don't.
All right, no worries.
Hi, I'm Barrett Darnell. I am a principal security engineer with Intuit on the red team. I've recently joined Intuit about 2 months ago. Prior to that, I was the managing senior operator at Bishop Fox, a security firm just focused on offensive security. I was there for 2 years, and before that, I spent 12 years in the Air Force. My last tour of duty was at Fort Meade. I was doing C&E and also on a national mission team. I kind of hit that point in my career where this was the most fun I was ever going to have, and so I decided to separate, and it's been great since then. I became a SANS instructor back in 2019. I teach SANS Security 660, which is advanced penetration testing and exploit writing. And Jean and I have been working on this red team course for many months now, hoping to keep things at a 500 level, to bring in a lot of folks that might be new to red teaming, but also deep enough in the technical that you walk away with some really good skills. And one challenge for us with the red team course is bookending the 5 days of instruction with engagement planning, threat intel, startup, and then also closure. And so we've got the middle of the course is really packed full of a lot of technical topics, a lot of emphasis on Active Directory. And then, of course, we've got so more of the soft topics of just, planning and reporting at the end. So I'll hand it over to Jean, my co-author.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Jean-François, but people call me Jean. It's kind of a handful or a mouthful to say in English because my name is French. So that's why people refer to me as John, which is perfectly fine. I started this journey with SANS about a year and a half ago, started in teaching the Security 699, which is a purple teaming course. But of course, I'm not just a SANS instructor. I also have another job, actually multiple jobs. I'm a freelance consultant. I work for companies all over the world, but I primarily am contracted by TrustedSec, which is a US company that has clients also all over the world, primarily focused on internal pen testing and red teaming. And on top of that, I'm also helping Help Systems starting this month with actively developing and updating Cobalt Strike, which is a very popular command and control framework. If you don't know what command and control is, don't worry about it. We are going to dive into that in just a few slides. So all good. And yeah, Barrett and I started this journey together writing a red teaming course, and it's been very challenging because this is, as Barrett already said, SANS' first 6-day red teaming course. There's no other course quite like this that is in the SANS catalog, so to speak. And as Barrett also mentioned, it's pretty hard for us to gauge this because it's a 5-level course. So we want to keep everything quite beginner friendly, but we also don't want it to be too easy as well, right? Because red teaming is not very easy. You're going to struggle quite a bit when you are in an operation, and that is also what we kind of want to do here in the course. So the way we designed the course, but we're going to talk about that later as well, is that in the beginning we give you a lot of information that you have to digest. But as the course progresses, it's going to get a bit less and less and less, and you're going to have to be expected to start learning how to enumerate stuff on your own. Not to worry though, we're still definitely available to catch you when you fall. but part of this course is trying to be as realistic as possible, and we give you a lot of information, but you have to digest it yourself and practice this in your own way. And that is definitely why this course is so awesome, because we have a whole practice range that you can destroy if you desire. Right, but before we go in all the courseware and why this course came to life, basically, we first want to discuss why even we started this journey. Why did we create a red teaming course in the first place? And here in this slide, you actually see what we call the cyber maturity model. And George Ochias, which is another SANS instructor, actually blogged about this. He has a link, he has a blog post on the SANS website that goes into detail, but a lot of organizations follow this in terms of their security posture and how they can mature their organization to be more resilient against cyber attacks. So the first thing that organizations typically want to know is what exactly their attack surface is, right? So they have a bunch of systems. Some of these are exposed online through a DMZ, others are just internal use, but they have a whole server park, they have workstations, they have whatever in their environment, and they want to know what exactly is going on. Is some stuff misconfigured? Is some stuff vulnerable? They want to know that first. They want to gauge how strong they already are in patch management and stuff like that. And when organizations come into the cybersecurity landscape and they want to learn about all these new things, they have this massive scope, right? They have like tens of thousands of systems, sometimes even some organizations have millions of systems. And you can imagine that if you would want to validate each and every one of these systems in a manual fashion, that would be pretty much impossible. So there are things out there to make life easier. Those things are called vulnerability scanners, and that is typically the first step in what organizations do. So they use a vulnerability scanner to scan their network, and the vulnerability scanner is going to do a whole bunch of automation. They're going to throw exploits at the machine, see what works, what doesn't work, and at the end of the day, you'll have a giant report. Now, that's already a nice first step, right? Now, organizations have a reports, but the thing is, the vulnerability scanner is an automated machine. It's a tool. And obviously, automation can also fail. So sometimes you have false positives in there. And well, not actually sometimes, a lot of the times you have false positives in there, and you kind of want to trim that down, right? So that is where vulnerability assessment comes in. You get people in your organization or external consultants that use the report that was generated by vulnerability scanners, and they're going to start validating these findings, right? Is it actually true what the vulnerability scanner says? Is this system really vulnerable, or is it more nuanced? Or did the vulnerability scan make a mistake and reported something vulnerable, but in reality it isn't? So that is where vulnerability assessment comes in. And once an organization has done this and know exactly what the weaknesses are, they can start patching that up. They can start remediating these vulnerabilities, and then they slowly but surely get ready for a penetration test. And a penetration test, what usually happens is either you have an internal team, or again, you have external consultants coming in, and they are going to start testing the environment. This is most of the time scope based. So the client is going to say, look, this is all the systems that I want you to test. Please do so. And then a tester or multiple testers are going to use their expertise and everything they know, some automated tooling, some manual work, to try and break into these systems, find vulnerabilities that sometimes get overlooked by vulnerability scanners, and try to pivot and get more and more privileges into your environment. Now, once this has been done a few times or even one time, and again, you have taken the appropriate actions, then an organization could potentially be ready for a red team. And red teaming, what is that all about? Well, in this case, we're not only going to assess the technology, we're not just going to assess all the servers out there, we are going to mimic a real life threat actor. So we are going to try and break into the organization, try and do as much damage between codes as possible. We're not obviously going to destroy the environment, but we're going to try and hunt for those objectives that the client deems so very important to their organization. For example, imagine a bank what don't you want adversaries to do? Well, you don't want adversaries to start stealing people's money, right? You don't want adversaries to just wire millions of dollars into some offshore account. Sometimes you don't want adversaries to find personal information of clients. So stuff like that. And that is where this course comes in as well. So as you see here in this slide, we have multiple coins here, and SANS tries to guide you every step of the way. We have courses for basically everything. So for vulnerability scanning and vulnerability assessments, we have the 460. Penetration testing, we have the 580 and the 560. For network, we have 542 for web applications. But for red teaming, we don't really have any course here at the moment. We have the 564, which is a 2-day course, if I'm not mistaken, by Giorgio Chies. But no full-fledged 6-day course that really goes in depth on how to red team, how to start using command and control frameworks, how to go after objectives instead of just trying to pen test everything. And that's where we come in, basically. That's what we try to fill. We try to fill that void, and we try to open the doors for penetration testers that already have a little bit of experience and that want to transition and level up their skills to become red teamers. And then finally, once an organization has done a red team assessment or multiple red team assessments, what usually happens is that the red team has some foothold. Usually they get some objectives, and what usually happens as well is that the logging and detection capabilities of an organization are not as fine-tuned as they would like, and that is where a purple team then comes in, which will allow you to replay specific techniques, specific attacks, and you want to start validating those detections, fine-tuning that, so you catch more evil and malicious stuff in your environment before it's too late. I hope that makes sense for everyone. If you have any questions, again, you have that Q&A option, so feel free to throw a question our way, and we try to answer as soon as possible. So I already talked about it a little bit. I said red teaming quite a few times already, but what exactly is a red team? Well, a red team, I already said, is not just going to try and attack every single system in an organization. It's going to try and assess people, processes, and technology. How does that usually happen? Well, an attacker is going to try to get an initial foothold into an organization, and usually that is not going to be just, hey, launch this payload, click it, and boom, you get in. No, it's going to be more tailored. It's going to try and fish people, trying to entice people to click something. That is then going to get an initial foothold into the organization, and then you try to remain below the radar, try to elevate privileges, try to get more and more systems to finally achieve your objective, and all that while testing the resiliency of the organization, because a red team is actually testing the security measures of a organization, right? Imagine that an attacker actually gets in, so someone clicks a malicious payload and an attacker gets into the organization. Well, it's now up to the organization to try and catch that attacker. It's up to the organization to try and detect and potentially prevent the attacker from moving forward. So while a red team is going on, we are testing those skills as well. We want to fly under the radar, but of course, secretly, because we are ethical, we want to get caught at some point in our exercise. If we don't get caught, then that means that the organization is probably not going to be resilient for an advanced attacker. So at some point, we want to get caught, but of course, we don't try to get caught, right? We try to remain under the radar, but secretly, we are hoping that at some point in our attack, the organization is going to catch us and is going to prevent us from moving forward. Because if that doesn't happen, well, then we really need to help the organization in tweaking their detection capabilities. So again, this is a realistic attack. This is something that a real adversary would do. So what is red teaming not? What doesn't a red teamer do? He's not going to get a foothold, start launching a vulnerability scanner, start blasting the network, making a ton of noise. So that is not what a real life adversary would do either, right? So we try to be as realistic as possible. Then I talked about adversaries quite a bit, and there's a lot of misconception between adversary simulation and emulation. People mix these up and get these confused. Even I myself get the terminology confused sometimes as well. So here we have a clear definition of simulation and emulation. Simulation is a situation or an event that seems real, but isn't real, right? And emulation is try to copy something from someone else and try to replicate that exactly as it would be. So an adversary you can have two types of assessments. Either you do an emulation where you are like, okay, we are going to emulate Fin7. You try to consume as much cyber threat intelligence as you can. You try to learn about the techniques, the tools that Fin7 uses, and you're going to replicate Fin7 exactly like Fin7 would do themselves. But you can also have simulation, and this is more nuanced. This is where red teams use techniques and tactics that they know themselves, sometimes even custom-made techniques that haven't been seen before, in order to try and emulate an advanced adversary and to achieve those objectives. And then finally, command and control frameworks. I already said it. If you didn't know what these are, then hopefully by the end of this slide, you will know exactly what these are. So in a typical testing scenario, what is going to happen with a penetration test? Either a device is going to be sent out to the client, and the device is going to get plugged into the network, or a consultant is going to come on site with a computer and plug into your network. Now, the thing is, with a penetration test, sometimes the tester will have GUI access, right? It means that sometimes they will have hands on a workstation, hands on a server, have remote desktop open, and can just use the GUI. But in the vast majority of cases, I'm not going to say that never happens in a red team, but in the vast majority of cases, when you are doing a red team, you're not immediately going to start your red team engagement with a GUI. It almost never happens. So you need to find a way to control systems from the outside, and hopefully and preferably a way to control multiple systems at the same time while still having a nice overview of things, so you're not confused, right? So you're not starting to type commands that were originally for another system and then you get mixed up, stuff like that. So you want something tidy, you want something that can control multiple systems at the same time if needed, and preferably something that is a bit silent, that can blend in with traffic so it doesn't stick out like a sore thumb. And this is where command and control frameworks are really used for. Basically, there are pieces of software, usually client server. So you have a server, a command and control server, and you have a client in the form of malware, a malicious payload that you need to get into the organization. That malicious payload is going to connect back to your server, and you will be able to execute commands on the server that will get sent to the client and then executed on that system. Usually this goes over HTTP or HTTPS, but in the course, we're also going to show you some more exotic ways of communicating, such as, for example, DNS. And then the C2 matrix. So again, command and control, it's basically a piece of software. However, there are multiple C2 frameworks out there, and they keep popping up every week or every month. There's someone dropping a new C2 on GitHub, and it gets really, really complex, really, really fast. It's really hard to keep up with everything, with everyone dropping out their C2s into the world. And George Ochias, once again, you can see him here on the picture, is also a SANS instructor. He tried to digest or ingest as much information as he can with regards to command and control frameworks. And he tried to create a website called the C2 Matrix, which shows you an overview of the command and control frameworks that are currently available and their capabilities, because a lot of command and control frameworks have different capabilities. Some, for example, have the capability to operate on Linux systems, on Mac systems, on Windows systems. Some are proxy aware, some are not proxy aware. So you kind of want to pick something that fits your use case. I already see a question popping up. What is the C2 framework that is part of this course? Well, don't worry, we are going to cover that in just a few slides. So again, to the C2 matrix, currently it tracks over 80 C2 frameworks out there, and that number just keeps increasing and increasing and increasing as time progresses. So it's really a very complex project, and we really thank George for doing all that hard work for us. And then I'm going to hand it over to Barrett once again to talk a little bit more about why SEC565.
So you just saw George Orchiles on the previous slide. He wrote the 2-day red teaming course for SANS, and we took that work as the foundation for the 6-day course. And so in this process of transitioning, we're working closely with George. He's our mentor as we are expanding the material to cover all 5 days, to get into all the topics we think are necessary for a red teamer to have the foundation to join a red team and be effective. We've already introduced ourselves. My specialty is on the Linux side. Jean is on the Windows side. So we make a pretty good pair as we come together. Transitioning between different OSs is something that is very common. Understanding your tool set and knowing how your tools will create some sort of impact on the systems you're touching is important. And then, as we mentioned before, what C2 are you going to use? It really depends on a few things: your operational security profile or Opsec profile, what threat actor that you're trying to emulate. In this course, we're going to emulate Hafnium. Hafnium, that was the threat group that was going after the Microsoft Exchange servers. So we've got a full functional Exchange server in the range. And you also want to know what their TTPs were. How did they exfil that data? How did they throw the exploit and then operate off of those Exchange servers? And so you want to try to emulate that. Why would a red teamer want to emulate one of these threat actors? Because for the blue team, it's really hard to secure all the things. It's pretty much impossible. Something that is stable today might be vulnerable tomorrow. And so you've got this feed of CVEs coming at you. You've got patches coming out. One thing that you can do to try to scope down the problem is take a look at the TTPs that a certain threat actor is using. And we want to go after these techniques, not necessarily a certain tool that's being used, because it's really easy just to modify the behavior of the tool to get beyond detections. But when you decide on an adversary that you're going to emulate and you communicate that with the blue team, it's almost like they get a scorecard. We can go to the MITRE framework, we can take a look at any reporting on that adversary, and they know exactly the types of techniques that you're going to use on that engagement. And so they can make sure that they have detections in place for that. One thing we want to do with this course is we want it to feel very realistic. So you will have a full Active Directory range from the beginning all through the course. And then on day 6 for the CTF, we're going to be using the same network, the same business that we're red teaming, but we're going to have a slight variation on things. We're going to tighten things up to make it a little bit more difficult. We don't want you to land on a target and for it to just be an empty box, right? If you've done a lot of CTFs, when you get a shell, you look for the flag and then you get the flag and you move on. Real life isn't that easy. There's a lot more to do than just collecting that flag. You want to enumerate that host. You want to find out exactly what that host does, what users are on that system. You want to make sure that you're not generating traffic that is very unusual for that host. And it takes skill. It takes skill to take a look around, to follow a few leads, to see if you can priv-esc on the system.Maybe you don't need that at all. Maybe you want to then move laterally elsewhere. But we want to make sure that these boxes feel realistic and that there's a story behind here. There's about 120 users in the environment. You will eventually get access to their emails. You'll start digging through their emails to try to get some target intelligence. You'll go through their home directories to see if they have any items in there that might aid you in your engagement. So we want to make sure that that as you land on a host, it's not a simple cat or type, flag.txt, but actually take a look around and try to understand what the host does, and then get that bigger picture of the environment. We're going to play with multiple C2s. We chose two for this course. We went with two open source ones so that anybody leaving the course will be able to have access to that. And we're always on the lookout for the next latest and greatest highly used and maintained C2. We do something interesting in this course where all the labs, we have instructions for you to use the different C2s that we've chosen. Slide. So the first one that we introduce is Empire. Empire was released in 2015 by Will Schroeder and Justin with many friends. There was a lot of emphasis on PowerShell. The C2 is just it's nice. It works. As new tools were released, those were brought in as modules. A lot of heavy reliance on PowerSploit. And it's open source, and it's right now being actively maintained by BC Security. And they've done some amazing things to improve the framework itself. They also have a GUI, a graphic user interface called Starkiller, which allows you to kind of visualize what you have control over, because the fact that you have these different agents throughout a network all calling back asynchronously, it can get kind of clouded when you're in that CLI. But this was a great project that the original authors have said they've accomplished their goals. They moved on to C# and a lot of C# based tools using .NET, and BC Security picked it up. So then in 2019, Covenant came out. Ryan Cobb released Covenant, and Covenant was primarily focused on the .NET tradecraft. So as PowerShell became more mature, there was more logging involved. It's a little bit harder to get away with making a lot of noise in PowerShell these days. Now we have .NET to take advantage of. And so a lot of those authors that you've seen make tools in PowerShell years ago, now they're heavily invested in C# and maybe some other languages as well. But C# gives you really easy access to the .NET framework, and so now your tooling can take advantage of the Windows API quite easily. So for our course, we chose two C2s to cover: Covenant as well as Empire. And as I mentioned, in the future, we're looking at possibly introducing some commercial C2s as well. Next slide. So now we're going to go over the next 6 days, or the 6 days of the course, talk about a few of the topics, and kind of giving an idea of the flow. So we want the course to be exercise heavy. Mentioned before, it's a fine line between making it accessible, since it is a 500 level course, but also having enough in there that someone with moderate experience isn't going to get bored. One way we tackle that is that we have bonus labs at the end of each day, so that if you blaze through the labs because you're really comfortable with the material, we've got harder challenges for you towards the end of the day. But for the first day, we will introduce red teaming. We'll talk about adversary emulation, a little bit of what you saw in today's webinar. We map to two different frameworks: a unified kill chain as well as MITRE ATT&CK. We think that both of those frameworks are really good in terms of communicating, because you can have this common language between the folks on the offense and the folks on the defense. You can use terms that are the same, because if you've been in this industry for more than a day, you'll notice that not only are there a million acronyms, but the same thing can be called so many different terms. I mentioned agents before. That's an Empire term. With Covenant, you call them grunts. With Cobalt Strike, you call them beacons. And so it does get a little confusing to just try to keep all those terms at play. That's why we try to map everything back to the MITRE ATT&CK and the unified kill chain, so that as you're talking with a coworker or you're talking with someone from the other team, you can use the same terms. We get into threat intelligence. We talk a bit about assumed breach, and then this is sort of the soft side of red teaming, where we talk about what it takes to build a red team. I spent 12 years in the US Air Force, and in that time, I built a lot of teams. And so there is both a technical and a non-technical aspect to creating a really well-functioning team. For those who were pen testers, you might, depending on where you work, but you might find that your job is kind of a solo operation. And so you against that network. But once you start working on a bigger scope, you can't do it all. And you're going to need a team. You're going to need roles and responsibilities. You're going to need good data flow between you and the other folks and being able to work together for whatever your objectives are. So we talk about the initial planning and the threat intelligence, and then we start getting into the red team execution. We start with the where you would from an external perspective, looking at reconnaissance and open source intelligence. Talk a bit about password attacks, a little bit about social engineering, but we accomplish the first two phases of the red team framework, and then we get into execution. Slide. So day two, we as I mentioned, right, this is where we're going to be very technical. We're going to talk about different red team tools, give an overview of all these different C2 frameworks, talk about how listeners work and different communication channels. If you go to the C2 matrix, you can take a look at each framework and see what type of communication channel that you can use with that framework. Some C2s allow you to communicate via DNS, others don't. Some C2s will let you create just raw listeners on TCP and push data. And so it all kind of depends on the C2 that you've picked. And even if you have a daily driver that you use in your work, you might use another C2 for a specific reason. Maybe because the adversary that you're emulating has used that, or because you might be in a contested environment and you don't want to use your daily driver. You don't want to use any of your really close hold tools. You don't want to lose those. You don't want those things snarfed up and sent a virus total right away. And so you might use an open source tool to kind of get a lay of the land and see what that response might be from the blue team. One thing that I think is fairly unique with this course is that we're going to talk quite a bit about pivoting, lateral movement, redirection, and in this course, right, we're going to make sure that you are pushing traffic through a redirector. Your agents or your implants out there should never talk directly back to your attack infrastructure. They should actually go through these buffers called redirectors, and we'll talk through that. It's very important to create some sort of protection between your infrastructure and the target network. So we'll get into that. We'll talk about some tips on creating resilient attack infrastructure, and then also in this course, we want to go deeper and we want to talk about IOCs, indicators of compromise, operational security, and tradecraft. Because as a red teamer, we mentioned you want to get caught eventually, but you want to pick the time and the place that you get caught. And so you want to have the ability to be stealth throughout your operation until you're at that point where, okay, we're going to make a lot of noise here, and we're going to keep that level of noise incrementing until we get that detection, because we want to see at what point does the blue team find us. And so every tool you use, everything you do on a network will create some sort of reaction. So every action creates a reaction, and it's kind of incumbent upon you as the red teamer to know, what is this tool going to do? What's it going to look like on the system? What IOCs might it leave behind? And what is it going to look like on the network? You have to have really good knowledge of your tool set, because you don't want to leave things behind by accident. We're gonna introduce Vector as an open source tool to do this planning and to track your actions, and then we'll end that day with Covenant. So we're going to start with setting up these C2 frameworks. We're going to spend time with Covenant, PowerShell Empire, and then, as I mentioned before, redirectors. It's important for you to understand networking, how things will be routed from that implant out to your C2. Oftentimes, if you're going through some of these exercises to kind of learn about these C2s, you'll notice that it's just a direct connection, right? You've got some sort of test system that you're working on. It talks right back to your C2, and we want to break apart. We want to break away from that sort of operation to actually using redirectors, making sure you have things set up right to route somewhere that's internet routable, and then back to your attack infrastructure, creating that buffer so that if there's an investigation, you can just burn that down and set up new infrastructure right away. Next slide. Then on day 3, we're going to get into weaponization, talk about creating and testing different payloads. We're going to get that initial access for our scenario for this first version of the course. We are emulating a Hafnium, so there is an exchange server. We're going to do a little bit of recon on the target network, and we're going to find out exactly what version of exchange they're using. Then we're going to start poking at it, see that it's vulnerable. We're going to get access, and then we're going to get into the network. You're going to propagate through that network, looking for doing discovery each time you get to either a new network segment or a new host. You're gonna keep track of any IOCs that you might create as you move around laterally. But this we're gonna keep things a bit separated from Active Directory. We're just making sure that we go through these topics, and then on day 4, that's when we're gonna dive deep into Active Directory. So over to you, Jean.
Yeah, thank you. So as Barrett already said, day 4 is going to be all about Active Directory. Everything you ever wanted to know and more. You are going to probably have a serious headache after day 4, but that's kind of normal, especially if you're not used to Active Directory. The thing we wanted to do here in this course is we want to give you as many different options of tools to use to achieve the same results. And why are we deliberately doing this? Well, because in a real operation, it will also depend on what kind of tool you will be able to use. Sometimes you'll be able to use things like Bloodhound. The vast majority of the time, you're probably not going to want to use that. Sometimes you will have access to a UI. So you might use things like AD Explorer, or you want to be really stealth and you want to learn about LDAP queries and how to manually craft your LDAP query in a way to just get the results that you want and not make any more noise than necessary. So again, we have tons of options for you to play around with. The whole environment is yours. We have a SOC stack that Barrett already mentioned, where you can hunt for your own IOCs if you would so desire. So yeah, it's a really big day with a lot of different tools on how to enumerate Active Directory in different ways, how authentication works, how authorization works, what access tokens are. We will also talk about using Active Directory in some instances to do DNS exfiltration. We have privilege escalation, of course. You do access token manipulation to escalate privileges. And we also try to keep up to date with current TTPs. And this is once again something that I personally feel that is one of the strengths of this course, and that is that we're both very passionate about red teaming, and we're trying to make this course as top-notch as possible. So expect a lot of updates from our side when new TTPs hit. So chances are that the course you're going to take now is probably not going to be the course that is going to be live 1 year from now. So you might want to retake this course after a few months or a few years, because every time a new TTP that is impactful enough hits or surfaces, we are going to make sure to implement that. And you can already see that here with things like Active Directory certificate services, with things like Petit Potam. So there's really a lot of things that we cover that are still very recent, and we want you to have that foundation, to have that with you when you are in an operation, so you can use the latest TTPs to your advantage as well. And then in day 5, we are going to take a look at things like Kerberoasting, things like silver ticket attack, golden ticket attacks, skeleton keys, a bit more of a deep dive to Active Directory certificate services. I'm also going to give a very small demo at the end of this presentation as well, because timing is already quite far. So we'll see how much of a demo I can still do. We're also going to talk about shadow credentials, which is another quite recent technique that we have used to establish persistence and privilege escalation. We're also going to talk about database attacks, how you can use databases to get command execution, sometimes even hop domains or lateral move between boxes through a database link. We talk about Power Up SQL, collection, data staging, and of course, also how to write reports, how to create value for your client. Because at the end of the day, a pen test and a red team both basically have the same kind of deliverable, where the reports is actually what the client is paying for, to be honest. Of course, your engagement and your exercise is very relevant, but at the end of the day, the client is going to see the report, going to read through what you did, your recommendation and how to prevent this from happening again. So that is where the value really is for a red team and for a pen test as well. And we're going to talk on how to write a report in a proper fashion, how to do a debrief to make sure that everyone is pulling on the same sail. So there we go. And then, of course, on day 6, it's a surprise, of course. Typical fashion, if you have followed the SANS course before, is that it's going to be a CTF, but we're not going to give much away yet. All I can say is that is going to be very realistic. We went out of our way to mimic some websites without giving too much away that are very close to the real thing that we're going to use in our environment as well. So you can be sure that it's going to be challenging. It's not for the faint of heart, but the reward at the end, after completion of the CTF, is going to be very, very sweet. All right, and that is about it, I would say, for the courseware, unless Barrett, you have something to add there.
No, I think we're ready for your demo.
Awesome. So sneak peek, Active Directory certificate services abuse case. So as I said, we are going to show a very small demo of one of the labs. Well, a part of one of the labs. We're not going to do the full lab. A huge shout out to the people of SpecterOps, because they actually published the white paper that we have read and that we use on a day-to-day basis in red team engagements and pen test assessments as well. So huge shout out to them for the research. And yeah, hopefully you'll enjoy the live demo. So pray to the demo gods, because some things might go wrong. Who knows? We'll see. And at the end, of course, we're also going to have some more Q&A. So first of all, what we want to show here is that I am going to need to change my screen, obviously, or you're not going to see it. So let's change screens to.
Hey, Jean, I've got the lab book up.
Okay, there you go. All right, so you can see here we have the workbook, and this is a Linux machine. It's a Slingshot, so that is a SANS distribution of a Linux version, let's say. And this one is a C2, the C2 Matrix edition. That one is actually available to download right now if you want, but of course it's a little bit modified to go hand in hand with our course. So we added some extra tooling there. We updated some command and control frameworks that we use in the course. But if you want to use the Slingshot, you can actually download that VM completely for free. And of course, with this Slingshot VM, there will be a lab workbook, electronic, which will be a hosted website that you can go to. Of course, you will have the physical books as well. It's going to look a lot like this. In this example, you can see that we have one lab here, the webcast ADCS sample. And as Barrett already mentioned, we have a choose your own adventure kind of thing with the labs. So you can choose whether or not you want to use Covenant or Empire. And if we would update the course and add another C2 framework or remove a C2 framework, then of course you'll have an extra option or a different option depending on what we want to do here. So if we would click open this Covenant approach, you would see a bit more text of what you can do with Screenshot. It really guides you to the exercise on how to actually execute these attacks with screenshots, everything like that. So quite nice. And then with Empire, of course, we have exactly the same thing, using Starkiller's GUI to show the output and the commands that you have to type. And then finally, we have our Active Directory environment, of course. That is where the quote unquote money is. It's a full-fledged Active Directory environment that you can use to your liking. And if you are curious about the computers that are there, well, that's the wrong command. That is actually the domain admin command. Sorry about that. Here we go. As I said, it's a live demo. Here are the computer accounts. We are going to show you in day 4 on how to execute these queries as well. These are LDAP queries using the ADSI searcher to show you that there are indeed quite a few systems in this lab environment. And here we also enumerated the domain admins. So we have administrator, SROC admin, Almeria, Zanelli, and Hubie Bowler, which will play a part in just a few minutes. Because as I said, we're going to talk about Active Directory certificate services. And what is Active Directory certificate services? Well, the certificate services can be used for a lot of things. Could be used in an organization for code signing, so signing software in the organization's name. But in our use case, certificates are going to be used for authentication purposes. And one of the things that you can actually configure with ADCS is a certificate for users that they can use to authenticate to different systems, but you could potentially have a misconfiguration in these certificates. And we actually see that misconfiguration in real life quite a few times as well. So it's not something that we just set up in a lab environment. No, this is really based on real life experience of both myself and Barrett when we red team or when we do an internal pen test and we audit the Active Directory certificate services. We see that all the time. Now there's a tool called Certify that is actually released by Spectrops when they released their white paper that we can use to enumerate these certificates. So if we use Certify with the find parameter and the vulnerable, we are actually going to query the Active Directory certificate services in this environment, and we are going to filter out the vulnerable certificates. So here it did its thing. It found that there is indeed a certificate authority in this environment. In this case, it's called Draconium DC01 CA. So this is an indication that the certificate authority is probably being hosted on a domain controller. But what we really want to see here is any potential vulnerable certificate templates. And we see here that indeed Certify found a template called user enrollment. And we can see that this MSPKI certificate name flag is stated to enrollee supplies subject. Now, this is a very dangerous setting to have in your certificates. And the funny thing is that if you as a sysadmin use this specific configuration, you are going to get a giant pop-up by Microsoft saying, look, this is really insecure. Are you sure you want to do this? Yes or no? And of course, some sysadmins don't read pop-ups. They just click yes. And then you have a vulnerable certificate in your environment. Now, enrollee supply subject means that the requester for the certificate can actually say, look, I want to request a certificate for authentication purposes. As you can see here, it is indeed used for client authentication, but I want to request this on behalf of someone else. Can you already see where I'm going with this? So we have enumerated the domain admins before, right? We know that this Almeria Zanelli is a domain admin in our environment. So with this certificate called user enrollment, we could request a certificate from the certificate authority on behalf of her, and we will get a certificate back that we can then use to authenticate on her behalf. She's a domain administrator, so that means that she's probably going to have access to every single system in the environment. So that's definitely not something you want every single authenticated user in your environment to be able to do. So Certify itself has the capability of requesting that certificate for you. So if I request that cert right now, using the requests, we use the template user enrollment, the alt name Almeria, which is the domain administrator, and of course the certificate authority of which we want to request the cert from, and we run this. It's going to take just a little bit of time. to actually request that cert. You can see request ID 7. So that means that this is the 7th time that this request has been issued. And we see here a cert.pem with this begin RSA private key. And if we scroll down, we actually see the certificate as well. So we can then copy paste that, call that cert.pem. I already did that in this specific case. And then it says convert with OpenSSL, this command. So we can do that as well to get the cert.pfx. So that is what I already did here as well. Now, if we have this cert.pfx, we can use another tool called Rubius, which also happens to be developed by SpectreOps. Once again, they're really Active Directory wizards right there. You can use Rubius to request a ticket granting ticket, which we will talk about, of course, in the course when we talk about Active Directory authentication purposes. So we use Rubius ask TGT, this specific user, with the certificate. And if we then use that, we will see that we get a TGT request. We see a giant string, and we can then use that to pass the ticket. But let's first show that we're not cheating. So let's see that this Garrett Kilgallen, let's try to access the domain controller. So dc01.draconum.corp, and we try to access the C share. And what do we get? We see access is denied. Okay, so that means that Garrett Kilgallen indeed does not have the privileges to access the C share on the domain controller. Now, if we use Rubius pass the ticket with the giant blob of text that we saw being outputted by Rubius, we can import a ticket granting ticket of the domain administrator into our session. If my copy paste wants to work at least. Okay, no, that's not right. So I forgot my // in front of the command. So that should be better. Yeah, it says ticket successfully imported. And hopefully, if I did this right, yep, we have access to our domain controller. So there you go. That is one of the things that we will see in the course as well. Here I showed it to you by dropping Rubius and certify on disk. Obviously not Opsec safe. If you want to learn how to do this over command and control channel, I suggest that you register for our course, because we are going to use this in Covenant. We are going to use this in Empire, and we will not drop anything on disk on the target. So that was the demo. I hope you enjoyed. Now, with that being said, are there any questions from the audience? I know that I already answered a few of them. So Adam asked which TA was mentioned that would be emulated. So that was Hafnium. Will there be a environment for the lab or AWS self-hosted like 699? Yes, our environment is hosted in AWS. So you will be able to access that on AWS. Does this course contain Active Directory, Azure, or cloud-related scenarios? Well, at the moment, no. That doesn't necessarily mean that we won't include that in the potential future, but at the moment, we are not touching clouds. SANS does have a cloud course. I believe that's the 588, correct, Barrett?
Yep, 588.
Yeah.
Cloud pen testing.
There you go. Will there be an on-demand version? Yeah, there will be an on-demand version. At least that's what we're aiming for. But that's probably not going to be released immediately when the course go live. That's probably going to take a few weeks or months for us to do the recording, for SANS to publish that, clean that up a little bit, and put that online. So there will be an on-demand, but it's probably not going to be right at the start. Will we get to actually create attacker infrastructure? That's a very good question. Barrett, maybe you want to tease that a little bit. Are they going to set up attack infrastructure?
Yes, yes, you will. You will set up attack infrastructure. Obviously, we have to make some concessions since we're hosting this in the cloud. You're going to VPN into your environment. And by the way, we haven't talked about that yet. This is a first for SANS. Not only the scale of the range environment, but also when we set out to write this course, we wanted to make sure that you can go back through and take a look at your IOCs, go log into the SOC box to see what sort of detections were there. And so you will have your own range during the length of the course. And so you will not be cohabitating on any of the targets with other students. And so you know that if you see an IOC, that's your own action. There, you're gonna VPN into a private network where we have it dressed up like a target organization, and then we have these two redirectors that you're gonna check out. So these two VPSs, and then you're gonna set up redirection rules. We're gonna show you many different ways to set that up, but for the as realistic as we can make it in this lab environment, yes, you will be setting up your attack infrastructure.
Awesome.
You want to keep going through these questions?
Yeah,
here?
sure.
Switch over to the unanswered real quick.
Yeah, the unanswered sounds good. Yeah.
Yeah, I can talk through a few of these. Certification plan for the course, absolutely. With SANS, we do have to have a successful run of the course and a good student body to then be nominated for certification, but that is 100% our goal. There was a question here about a trial license. No, you will not get a trial license to Cobalt Strike. And the C2 question we answered, Empire and Covenant. And the tail end of day 5, that's when we're going to go through closure. We're going to talk a bit about effective report writing and all the content that you want to make sure that you have in there. Now, this question here: are there copies of the labs that we can use in our own personal labs? The fully active range that you have, you'll have that access through the length of the course. Some of the exercises are local only, but during the Active Directory section, that is access via the VPN. It's hosted in AWS, and it's only there for the time that you have the course. And so you're not going to be able to build the entire range yourself in your own local environment. So we'll have quite a bit on the. We try to have as much as we can on the VM, but certain things we have to go through the range. So we will do this course live and virtual, and then the on-demand we will record as soon as we can. And if you've taken 699, there's been some questions about Terraform, and do you just get the Terraform files to go ahead and build your own range? Not in this case. And we will not be talking about EDR as much. We will be talking about tradecraft and your Opsec to make sure that you have a good understanding of your tools, and we'll talk through like what it is, that challenge of going up against an EDR, but we're not going to have you actually evade or bypass any EDRs.
Yeah, on that note, we are going to touch on we are going to touch on the methodology on how you can bypass an EDR. We are also going to touch on a practical example on how to bypass AMSI, but we are not going to actively make you fight an EDR or provide you with additional practical guidance on how to defeat EDRs, because this is a 5-level course. We want to make this as open for everyone as possible. And EDR evasion, that could be a course on its own, to be honest. It's quite complex. So we are going to show you the methodology on how you could potentially do it and how to do your own research in order to successfully create a payload that will bypass it. But we are not going to be very practical about all that stuff.
All right. And then there's a last question here. If you have any questions, send them in through Zoom. how deep will you go into cyber threat intel on day one? And to be honest with you, SANS has a full 6-day course on cyber threat intel. We spend just a little bit of time to make sure that everyone, depending on their background, they have some of those basics, but not very deep. If that's what you do for your day job, you're going to see sort of just the basics of CTI. There was a question here. I just want to make sure we cover some of the other ones that were answered via Zoom. Is there an advanced version of the course planned? And yes, there is. 665 is the advanced red teaming course. Not sure on the release there because of the development pipeline, but that is in the works. The syllabus is online. If there are any changes over the next few weeks, we'll get that posted there. And let me give you an idea of the timeline. So right now I mentioned that that Jean and I are actively working on making sure that that lab environment is resilient, so that things are self-healing. If you create an effect, you will have quite a few rights in that lab environment. There are 3 domains, Active Directory domains. There's one main one that you're using. There's a child domain as well as another domain that in the story it's sort of like the investment company of your main customer. And so there's a lot to do there. There is the ability to just burn it all down, and so that's why we're going through to try to make sure to keep it as resilient as possible. Oh, Julio asked a question about the cert. Will it have any practical questions? That's to be determined. That's to be determined. Another thing about timeline, we get the question a lot. When is the first live version of the class going to exist? So right now, through our development process, we with SANS, we normally do an alpha run of the course. That's where we bring in other instructors and we run the course through. That lets us take a look at the material, gauge how much we have and how much time we have. I think that we've gone a little overboard with the amount of material.
Probably.
Jean and I produced, I think, 800 slides across the 5 days there. But we're going to go through that timing over the next few weeks. We're going to have our alpha in June, and then there's a beta. The first beta is open to students. It comes at 50% off of the list price, and that's sort of that first run we do with students that are seeing the material fresh for the first time. Then there might be a second beta, and then we'll go live. So sometime in Q4 of this year, we'll go live. We want to get there as fast as possible, but quality is one of the most important things. The SANS, as well as us as authors, we take a lot of pride in our work, and so we want to make sure that we're not rushing ahead. That things are very, very tight and tested for the courseware, the lab books, as well as the range. And so sometime in Q4, we should see the course fully live. And then as soon as we can, we want to get it on demand. All right, any other questions?
Think we're good, man.
All right, well, thank you everybody for joining us. I think Carol is going to wrap things up, but just from Jean and I, fantastic to see the interest out there. I think that we've got some topics that we want to cover in this course that make it quite unique. Really, that capability model that we showed earlier. Getting folks comfortable with Active Directory environments, and then just from start to finish, what it means to do a red team engagement. Jean, do you have anything to close with?
No, I think we covered everything. I'm very happy to see some familiar faces, and we got quite a crowd, so that's awesome. And hopefully we get to meet all of you in one of our classes. So yeah, thanks for listening.
All right, well, thank you so much, Barrett and Jean, for your great presentation, which helps bring this content to the SANS community. To our audience, we greatly appreciate you listening in. For a schedule of all upcoming and archived SANS webcasts, including this one, please visit sans.org/webcasts. Until next time, take care, and we hope to have you back again for the next SANS webcast.